Great. So nice to be here, and I think a lot was already announced in the presentation about the weirdness that some people may report, for instance, reporting that days of the week are associated with colors. And this is very much the topic that we picked up with Charles about a decade ago, trying to explore a bit more what was going on with these surprising connections, especially because we were puzzled by the number of people who would actually recognize themselves when we were describing such associations. And it seemed to be much more prevalent than other researchers had said. So we thought, well, maybe not everybody is reporting exactly the same thing where we're talking about surprising sensory connections. So that was a sort of detective story that we will tell you about. But at the time we started, it was already true that many people had been fascinated by associations, and I just show you three famous books written by psychologists where they would report people associations between days and the week and color. Wednesday's indigo blue, for instance. There are also associations between sounds and colors, or musical notes and colors. So the sound of the frog is also blue for some people. And finally, Richard Sitovich, who really contributed to the popularization of the condition of synaesthesia, wrote about a famous subject who actually had this very rare form of tasting shapes. Every time he was actually holding a shape, he would actually have an association with a flavor. So the question is, when people are reporting things that, for instance, that the color of the ink seems to actually spread and the letters become colored, are they really reporting something which is genuine, or is it an alteration of consciousness similar to the drug experiences? Here we have a lot of different indications that people, even these participants, for instance, report these things outside of any consumptions of psychedelics or any substances. So people really say that they chose to study linguistics because the color of the word was right. Some people really have this strong association between flavors and some cool glass columns, for instance. Or these other participants really insisted that when she hears music, they're associated with flavors like toast soaked in hot water, and the middle regions are sweet, like licorice and banana. These reports are just picked out, and there were people who were absolutely adamant that this corresponded to a genuine experience. So many people also have reported in history associations between music and color. This is really a surprising thing when you think about the way the senses are supposed to be wired. That is, if you listen to something, it should just give rise to an auditory perception. There is no reason why it should come with a visual perception, as people report in that case. And it led many researchers to think that there was something really, really special in a few individuals. There was a kind of special condition. It's also was an interesting point for the history of psychology and neuroscience, because usually we always study deficits, people who are losing vision or losing hearing, or people who are missing something. Synaesthesia is a condition where there is something extra, there is a plus, and there are not that many conditions. And I think that's really explained why it's so fascinating, that it seems like some people have this extra level of experience. Weekdays are not just weekdays, they also have colors. How fantastic. And really what is part of this definition that was provided is the idea that some conscious experience are systematically induced by some stimuli in a way which is not present in others. So that makes the condition really fascinating. Now that we have been maybe convinced or that this is something genuine, that some people have this extra, I will, beside your English teacher, is anybody in the room actually thinks or maybe has already done some tests thinking they have synaesthesia? That is great. We have one person. That's no. 2, okay. There is also a more common form that maybe some of you experience, that's the days of the week or the months of the year also are situated in different regions of space. So in my case, I think I have this, like July is always here and this is September and January is always behind me. So you have this sort of visual representation also in space of different moments of the year. And although it's not really a color or a taste or a sound that is associated, it also counts as a form of synaesthesia when you associate words with a specific location in space. But we have, I think, a good sort of representation of how rare that condition is. And synaesthesia, it turns out, runs in families, so it's also another argument for thinking there's something pretty specific. So if you're synaesthete, ask your siblings, your parents, your aunts, because they're quite likely to also have a form of synaesthesia. Maybe not the same as yours, maybe not a sound color, for instance, maybe it can be a taste shapes, but we have now a good understanding of the genetic basis of this specificity. And the variety has been growing since the first reports I shared with you. Now there talk about 65 different kinds of synaesthesia when you think about the different stimuli that can induce music, sounds, letters, full words, taste, shapes, and so on and so forth. And the variety of conscious experiences that can be triggered. They can be color, they can be sound, they can be texture, and so on and so forth. So this has really opened a sort of very interesting mapping exercise for synaesthesia. And I'm giving you here, for instance, one of the ideas that they tend to correlate. So color is a very frequent experience. You can see it on the color sensation. Touch, orgasm, color is an interesting one, maybe more pleasant than the pain color, but that's the temperature, personality, emotions can induce that. And also the spatial sequences I was mentioning. Now, what about the neuroscience? If there is a genetic basis and there is so much consistency in the reports and the experiences that people describe, can we track it to some specificity, some special wiring in the brain? And until now, it's still puzzling for neuroscientists. There's just not a single account of what explains synaesthesia, but we have good and robust competitors. Hyperconnectivity seems to be a strong candidate for an explanation. That is, instead of having just the connections wiring from your eyes to the visual cortex, then there is some extra connectivity that is triggering some auditory sensation on top of the visual experience. So there's more connectivity in synesthetes is one big hypothesis, or they could be done for sort of hyperreactivity linked to serotonin levels. Now, the question that you can ask is also whether these accounts actually predict that there will be a clear cut between synesthetes and non-synesthetes. So if you think about hyperconnectivity, it's not as if we could sort brains between a lot of connectivity and then just another sort of lower degree. So you would predict actually, if there is hyperconnectivity, that there's more of a continuum of phenomena than a disconnect between synesthetes and non-synesthetes. And same for serotonin levels. It's not true that you would have suddenly a set of the population with super high level, a gap, and then other lower levels. So that's what strikes us as maybe suggesting that synesthesia was not such a clear-cut phenomenon. And one of the key scientists who have studied this condition actually came up with the same sort of diagnosis, that when you start looking at what synesthesia really is and you try to explain it in the brain, it seems that it's a bit like a diffuse thing. So you're starting to see it a bit everywhere. And Lawrence Marks actually had the same recognition, that every time he was trying to explain it, his synesthesia catcher seemed too small and insufficiently flexible to capture the creature at once so large and agile. So you start realizing that synesthesia, either when you look at the experience or the neuroscientific explanation, is not such a clear-cut, rare phenomenon, but maybe something that spreads and is much more diffuse. So we had actually a good, I think we had 3 or 4 people in the room who admitted having conscious synesthesia. So that's very close to the prevalence of 4%. You have a very representative sample, thank you. But let's see whether we can convince you that there is actually many more of you who might be experiencing synaesthetic phenomena, and I will give it to Charles at this point.
Thank you. So yeah, I sort of think that maybe we are not all synesthetes, but I do think we all have surprising connections between our senses that we spent the last decade trying to study, to differentiate from the synesthesia you've heard about, this rare condition, and try and show that we all show these connections that are almost synesthetic. And 2 of my favorite examples of that come from the Buba-Kiki effect, so-called, known about for almost a century now, and the Mill-Mal effect. This is the Buba-Kiki effect. We have 2 arbitrary, meaningless shapes, and we have 2 meaningless, just made-up words, one Buba and one Kiki. And Irvin Kohler, back in 1927, was asking participants, which shape would you give to which name? Is it like that? Do you want to? Does it feel right? It just sort of feels wrong somehow, but the majority of people say, yeah, if I had to make a choice, Kiki has to be the angular one on the left. And there are no right answers about this, but there is a consensual answer suggesting that many of us, all of us in fact, are sharing these connections between speech sounds and shapes, a phenomenon called sound symbolism, and for many, an example of synesthesia too. But notice this is something we all share. We all think Kiki is on the left. And we've been to the Himba tribe in Kaoko land in Namibia with no written language, no schooling, no supermarkets, no access to contemporary culture. And they have exactly the same gut feeling about the shape of speech sounds. Another example, some from 1929 from Sapir. Is the Mill-Mal. This is the question I give to the undergraduates when they come for interviews for a place, Oxford University, where I teach. And Sapir asked, we have 2 tables, one large and one small. Which table would you want to call Mill and which table Mal? And again, probably you have a feeling about that Mal just has to be the larger table, and Mill sounds like the name you'd want to give to a small object. This isn't quite as ubiquitous. It's about 87% rather than almost 100% who show the Buba-Kiki effect, but still it's shared across many languages. And the explanation isn't, well, mill sounds like millimeter or minuscule, but in fact, in a variety of languages, people share the same association. Maybe it's about the I sound is smaller than a sound. Maybe it's about the shape that your mouth makes when you try and utter those different vowels. There are a number of hypotheses out there. Maybe it's something about small objects tend to make higher pitched noises when you hit them, kick them, drop them, or bang them. Large objects make lower pitched noises, and our brains internalize these connections between the senses that then we can play back in sort of surprising ways. Maybe I'll do it the other way around this time. Is there anybody out there who didn't think Kiki was angular and Mal was large? No, which is what we'd expect. Everyone is showing these surprising connections between the senses. And if we think of this as a kind of synesthesia, a surprising connection between the senses, then suddenly we're all synesthetes. And it's not just the 4 people in the room. And there's some differences here, I think. For some people, like for the definition we had earlier, synesthesia is defined as an idiosyncratic, something that most people do not experience. Whereas Buba-Kiki and Mill-Mal, we all experience, and so by definition it can't be synesthesia. And also, unlike the man who tasted shapes, who felt shapes in his hands when he was tasting, and when he burnt the roast chicken, he would feel really pointy, angular shape in his hand. Add a bit of sweetness, and the shape he felt in his hand when he was cooking that chicken became rounder. In that case, there was no actual shape there, but the taste gave rise to this vivid illusion or mental image of a shape. Whereas for you and I know kiki's angular, but I don't see that shape when I hear the word, or vice versa. And when thinking about these, what I want to call, or we've called sort of correspondences, the surprising connections between the senses that we all share, then one sort of drawn back, being here in Munich, to the work of Kandinsky, who has inspired much of our own research, my students' research in the lab. He was a synaesthete, as far as we can tell, very interested in converting colour to music and vice versa. And he was famous in the Bauhaus for suggesting these surprising associations between colour and shape. There are still the records of the 80 or 90 students who Kandinsky asked, if you had to ascribe a colour to a triangle, a circle, and a square, which would you colour red, which would you colour blue, and which would you colour yellow? And he claimed there were these, again, correspondences, but this time between colour and shape. And we and many others have been following up on Kandinsky's work over the last century. And for some reason, it turns out that these surprising connections within vision, within your sight, between colour and shape, are far less reliable than the cross-sensory ones, like the sound of shapes in Buber Kiki. And that might be because when we colour shapes, it's not just a combination of two visual features, but that coloured shape may take on meaning. So when people do Kandinsky's experiment in Japan, they might think that the circle has to be red because they're referencing the national flag instead. So there's these semantic associations. And we still haven't got to the bottom of this, why it is that these surprising sensory connections are more prevalent between the senses than within a sense. But I think there's something important theoretically there. And in our work, we try and convince people that we're all kind of synaesthetes. We all experience these correspondences by giving Buber Kiki to anyone we can find, and also asking silly questions like this: is a lemon fast or slow? It's got to be fast. Bananas, they're kind of slow. Prunes, majority of people will say, are slow. But what is it about a lemon that we want to associate with speed? This might be a taste-speed correspondence. Maybe it's that lemon juice and acidity is transduced very quickly on the tongue, faster than sweetness, salt, and so on. We're still getting to the bottom of it, but again, we know cross-culturally that the majority of people will associate taste with speed. And then we can go on looking around to find all the different kinds of surprising connections that have been documented now between brightness and pitch, between timbre and colour, something perhaps of interest to Kandinsky and the other colour music people. We look at the weight of colours. Almost any combination of sensory features, of colours, of tastes, of sights, of sounds, of textures are connected in these surprising ways that many of us share, that few of us have thought about until it's pointed out to them, and which do resemble a kind of synaesthesia. And for us, we want to take these insights and then think how we can use them in the world of design. And so we collaborate a lot with designers and artists, musicians, composers, creating things like this, which we launched in Euro Cucina, the big catering show in Milan in 2018. It's the world's first plateware that is designed to enhance the taste of the food that's served on it, built on these surprising connections. Take the bowl on the top left. It is pinkish red because that is the colour we associate with sweet. It's rounded because sweet is round, bitter is angular. And this dessert bowl is designed to make things sweeter without having to add more sugar. And of course, being here in Munich during the Oktoberfest, we might think, is there application of these surprising sensory correspondences to beer? And I think there is. And while I haven't seen any sonic seasoning in action at the Oktoberfest last night, I saw lots of other stuff, but no sonic seasoning. We've been working together with The Roots, a US pop group, and Stella Artois beer. And they, pop group, have created a music track and associated video with the shapes, the colours, and the instrumentation to bring out sweet or to bring out bitter. This called Sweet to the Bitter End. Here's a little excerpt. Right. And we have the research now to show that you can accentuate sweetness by building on this colour, shape, sound connection to taste. You can bring out bitterness, if that's your thing, by changing the colours, changing the shapes in the two videos there. And so people at home could taste their beer, download the app, and then in real time change the taste of their beer built on these surprising sensory connections. And the final example I'll give comes from work we've been doing with Guinness Hop House Lager, where we worked with video artists to create virtual reality installations. People put on the headset in their local supermarket. They were offered 3 different flavours of beer to taste, and then on came some projections with colours, with shapes, with forms, built on this kind of
anything we dream of,
research.
we get to brew up. I'm Peter Simpson, and I'm the head brewer. So welcome to a unique tasting experience. First, we're going to taste Guinness West Indies Porter. So if you're ready, let's dive in. Cover the cup you're holding with your other hand, then gently swirl it around to release the aromas of the beer. Bring the cup up to your nose and smell the beer. Now take a sip and swirl the beer in your mouth for a few seconds before you swallow it.
It's tasting beer like you've never tasted before. And I think a really exciting interface between the psychological science and the neuroscience, built on our attempt to understand synaesthesia, and for me, more importantly, the surprising sensory connections we all share. Think about why they exist, and then think about how we can use them to create enhanced tasting experiences, be it for your dessert, be it for your beer. And the more you look out there now, the more you can find these kind of connections are being incorporated into design practice from molecular gastronomy chefs through installations and even architecture as well. So with that, I think we shall finish. Thank you for your attention.